Good morning. This is Debbie Royce, Empire State Development's Corporate Secretary. I'd like to welcome everyone to the ESD Bond Financing Committee meeting. Before we begin, I will ask everyone to please mute your phones unless you're speaking. And I'll begin now by taking a roll call of the committee members. When I call your name, I'd be asked if you could please stay present. Howard Zemsky?
Present.
Eric Gertler?
Present.
Tronic Pants?
Present.
Thanks so much. Howard, you have a quorum of the committee and are ready to begin when you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. Good morning, everyone. Before I call the meeting to order, I'll note for the record I'll serve as the acting chair for today's meeting. I now call to order the meeting of the Bond Financing Committee, members of the New York State Urban Development Corporation, doing business as Empire State Development, for Tuesday, May 26, 2020. Before we get started, I'll ask everyone to please mute your phone until you're ready to speak. And for the record, I'll ask that anyone wishing to speak, please be sure to state your name before you begin. I'd also like to note for the record that due to public health concerns and as authorized by the executive order of the governor, this meeting will be conducted by teleconference. I'll note for the record that the public was given the opportunity to comment on the agenda items by submitting written comments by 5:30 p.m. yesterday. I'll note for the record that no comments were received from the public concerning today's agenda items. Committee members have received the relevant written materials in advance of today's meeting and are free to ask questions at any time. I'll now ask the committee members whether anyone has any potential conflict of interest with respect to today's agenda items. Okay, hearing no conflicts, I will now ask Doug Brissett to present today's first agenda item, which relates to the issuance of state personal income tax revenue bonds, Series 2020A and Series 2020B. Doug?
Thank you, Howard. Good morning, everyone. Today, the committee is being asked to approve forms of two supplemental resolutions, the preliminary official statement and the official statement, and other related documents in connection with the proposed sale and delivery of one or more series or subseries of the New York State Urban Development Corporation's, more simply the corporation, personal income tax revenue bonds, otherwise known as PIT bonds. The PIT bonds may be issued as tax-exempt and or taxable bonds on one or more dates in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $3,818,520,000, which includes the remaining principal amount of $1,818,520,000 of previously approved but not issued sales tax bonds that will now be issued as PIT bonds, as well as up to $2 billion of additional approved PIT bonds scheduled to be issued at a later date. As stated in the resolutions, the committee, on behalf of the corporation, is also being asked to delegate authority to certain officers and employees of the corporation to establish, within certain parameters, final terms of the bond sale, including the aggregate principal amount, and to take all actions deemed necessary to accomplish the final sale and delivery of the bonds. The bonds will be issued by the corporation pursuant to the Personal Income Tax Revenue Bond Financing Program and will be secured by a pledge of financing agreement payments from the amounts legally required to be deposited into the Personal Income Tax Revenue Bond Tax Fund. The Personal Income Tax Revenue Bond Tax Fund receives a statutory allocation of 50% of state personal income tax receipts and 50% of the receipts from the New York State Employer Compensation Expense Program. Distributions of such funds are subject to annual appropriations by the state legislature. The Bond Financing Committee previously approved a master disclosure agreement that will apply to the bonds, the appointment of co-bond counsel, and an application submission to the Public Authorities Control Board, PACB, for the authorization to fund the projects or programs with the bond proceeds. On February 19, 2020, the PACB approved such application and authorized state personal income tax revenue bonds and/or state sales tax revenue bonds in an amount not to exceed $2.2 billion. This is the February PACB approval. On March 26, 2020, the corporation issued $381,480,000 of the $2.2 billion aggregate principal amount of state sales tax revenue bonds, Series 2020. This will be referred to as the Series 2020 A and B sales tax bonds. This was done in a private placement pursuant to the February PACB approval and the Bond Financing Committee approvals on February 5th of 2020, the first approval, and February 20th, 2020, the second approval. The first approval authorized the issuance of state sales tax revenue bonds and/or state personal income tax revenue bonds. The second approval, however, authorized the issuance of only state sales tax revenue bonds. As noted earlier, due to challenging financial market conditions in the recent months, only a small portion of the total $2.2 billion of Series 2020 A and B sales tax bonds were sold in a private placement in late March. Since that time, the New York State Division of Budget decided to issue the remaining authorized sales tax revenue bonds as state personal income tax revenue bonds. Given the earlier issuance of the Series 2020 A and B sales tax bonds, Supplemental Resolution 2020-1 will now authorize an amount not to exceed $1,818,520,000. This is the remaining authorized amount. In addition, the corporation is adopting Supplemental Resolution 2020-2, authorizing one or more series of state personal income tax revenue bonds to be issued at one or more times in an amount not to exceed $2 billion. This is the additional corporation approval. On May 20th, 2020, pursuant to the corporation's application submission, the PACB authorized the issuance of up to $2 billion principal amount of state personal income tax revenue and/or state sales tax revenue bond anticipation notes, BANs, and up to $2 billion principal amount of state personal income tax revenue and/or state sales tax revenue bonds to be issued at one or more times in a total aggregate principal amount not to exceed $3.3 billion. This is the additional PACB approval, and together with the additional corporation approval, these are the additional approvals. At the time of pricing of this current bond transaction, to the extent the bond principal amount proposed to be issued at the request of the Division of Budget exceeds the remaining authorized amount of $1,818,520,000. The corporation will rely on these additional approvals to issue an additional principal amount of up to $2.0 billion of PIT bonds. Any portion of this additional $2 billion of PIT bonds issued will reduce the principal amount available for issuance under those additional approvals at a later date. Proceeds from the sale of the bonds will be used to finance projects related to certain state projects and programs and other state-supported activities, and may refund certain outstanding state-supported debt previously issued. The bonds will be sold on a competitive and/or negotiated basis as fixed-rate, tax-exempt, and fixed-rate taxable bonds. The tax-exempt and taxable bonds will be offered through a single preliminary official statement. In accordance with the attached resolutions and exhibit, the committee is requested to adopt the New York State Urban Development Corporation Supplemental Resolutions 2020-1 and 2020-2. Authorize the sale of each series of the bond on a public, competitive, and/or negotiated basis. Approve the form and content of the preliminary official statement, the official statement, and various documents connected with the sale and delivery of the bonds, and authorize certain officers and employees of the corporation to take all actions deemed necessary to accomplish the final sale and delivery of the bond. By approving the Financing Committee resolution, the committee will establish $3,818,520,000 as the maximum aggregate principal amount of the bonds that may be issued. Establish a maximum true interest cost of 7.5% for the tax-exempt bonds and 10% for the taxable bonds. Establish the maximum final maturity date of not more than 30 years after the date of issuance. And delegate to certain officers and employees the power to A, determine the terms of the bonds within the parameters set forth therein, including but not limited to the final aggregate principal amount of the bonds, the principal amount of each series of the bonds, the principal amount of the bonds maturing in each year, the final maturity dates for such bonds, and the interest rates of the bonds. B, issue and deliver the bonds pursuant to the contract of purchase if the bonds are sold on a negotiated basis. C, award the bonds to one or more successful bidders if the bonds are sold on a competitive basis. And D, make such changes to the related documents deemed necessary and appropriate. The bonds are expected to price on next Wednesday, June 3rd, and close 1 week later on Wednesday, June 10th. The schedule of other potential PIT bond issues discussed here has not yet been determined. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thanks, Doug, for that good and thorough description. Are there any questions or comments from the committee members on this item?
I have none.
Okay. We don't have any comments from the public. I'll entertain a motion for approval. Is there a motion to approve?
Motion.
I'll move, Mr. Schoenig. Second.
I'll second it.
Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, thanks. The motion carries. Doug, will you present the final item today, which relates to the issuance of state personal income tax revenue bonds series 2020C and 2020D?
Yes, Howard and committee members, that resolution was presented together with the other resolution. So what I had presented were both resolutions together.
Okay, great. Do we need to modify the motion or anything, Liz, or are we good?
I would just say, Howard, this is Debbie, to just go ahead and ask for a motion to approve the 2020 C and D, just to
Okay.
make, belt and suspender. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep, that makes sense. Thanks, Debbie.
Okay, is there a motion to approve 2020C and 2020D personal income tax revenue bonds issuance?
All motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, great. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? None. We don't have any other items. Is there a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Motion.
Thank you all for joining. Much appreciated. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.